Matthew 14. And we're going to read we're not going to read all four accounts, but we will read three of the accounts of Jesus feeding the 5,000. Matthew 14, beginning in verse 13 through verse 21. When Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Just again, by way of reminder, this event follows in the immediate wake of the murder of John the Baptist. This account follows the execution of John by Herod. And so I just want to put a little context into what's going on in the life of Jesus at this particular time and everything that happens to be going on. All right, let's go to Mark chapter 6 and verse number 30. And that's the pretext. The death of John's the pretext for what is said in verse 30. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before him and came out together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, gave them to his disciples to set before them, and the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. And those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. Now let's look at John's account, John 6. I'm going to start in verse 1. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" For this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "Here is a lad who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world." And so John gives us a little bit different perspective on the crowd, a little bit different perspective on the conversations that took place. And he actually kind of picks up in a little bit different place in the narrative, a little bit deeper than Matthew and Mark. But I want to make a note here, or make a reference to, in the introduction, in the second paragraph of the introduction. It says, "Other than the resurrection, this is the only miracle recorded in all 4 Gospels." Now, I was not aware of that before reading the material. I mean, I knew it was in all 4, but I didn't know it was the only one of all 4. And so, now, according to the writer, it says this makes this miracle very significant, and says, "Consider," and I did know this. "Consider that John only chose 7 miracles to cover in his entire gospel. 7 miracles." And you can read, for example, you can read more than that in Matthew chapters 8 and 9. Just in 2 chapters, you can read more than that in those 2 chapters of Matthew. And so John was very careful about the miracles that he wrote about. And by the way, of the miracles that John recorded, for example, at least one of them is not recorded in any of the other Gospels, which is the wedding feast at Cana in John chapter 2. And so John records this as one of the miracles of the 7 that he did write about. And then it says he did not use the same ones as the other Gospels. Now, here is, and I already gave you the context. This is the end of what we call the Third Galilean Tour. Herod had just beheaded John the Baptist. Herod had expressed interest in the work of Jesus. We talked about this. It said Herod sought to see Jesus, but he apparently didn't try very hard, because the Bible tells us at the end of Luke's account that when Jesus was sent by Pilate to Herod, that was the first time that Herod had seen him. It said that Herod had desired a long time to see him. And so this is the context. The apostles had returned from their mission, John chapter 6 and verse 1. And we talked about, again, this timeline. Here comes, we start with the work of John. He's the forerunner. He's he's making the path ready for Christ. He himself knows that said he must, speaking about Jesus, he must increase, I must decrease. So what happens? We find John being imprisoned just about the time that Jesus is beginning his ministry. There's some overlap, obviously, but what I mean is that Jesus begins in a very large-scale way to go out through his disciples, the sending of the 12, the sending of the 70. John's in prison, and then, while all this is going on, then John is executed. And it's like I mentioned last week, that the death of John helped come to pass that he must increase and I must decrease. And it also, and I think John was talking about this last week, that it helped eliminate any friction or competition between John's disciples and Jesus' disciples. In other words, it helped bring the two groups. John's death actually helped bring the two groups together, as opposed to being two separate groups, because it was never intended for there to be two groups. There was supposed to be one group. John John initiated it. Then Jesus comes, and the two essentially merge together.
But we do see that it didn't completely work, because there were still disciples of John.
There were still disciples of John.
But for the most part, it was intended. I believe that it was intended.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. Of course, part of it has to do with, some of John's disciples had gone out. Apollos, we read about Apollos in Acts 18 in Ephesus and Corinth, and he's still out preaching John's baptism, John's message. That's years down the road.
But in sense though, the kingdom was coming to them.
That's true. But what I'm saying is that it was only natural that there would still be some disciples of John, because there were some people who still hadn't heard that Jesus had come.
Right.
And so, but the majority of those, in and around Judea had heard John, and then when John died, was executed, when Herod took him out of the way, it really made the path for Jesus and his disciples easier by kind of joining forces with those who had been prepared by John the Baptist. All right, then also in the introduction is, it's 1, 3, 4, 5, says something we need to focus on is how Jesus helped people. One of the things that we find from the very beginning of the ministry of Jesus is that Jesus was interested in people. I mean, Jesus was obviously interested in teaching, and Jesus was interested in preaching the message that he was sent to preach. But he had a natural affection for people. Before the Sermon on the Mount, we read in Matthew chapter 4, he went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all manner of sickness and disease among the people. And over again, we find Jesus's compassion for people was the doorway through which he walked in order to teach people. In other words, he helped people. People were attracted to Jesus, and so in his benevolence, in his miracle working, he opened doors for what his ultimate mission was, which was to teach people. That's the ultimate mission. And so, but Jesus had a natural affection for people.
Shows God's love for men.
Sure. Sometimes we can struggle. Sometimes we can struggle with those types of things. At least when I say we, I say me. Sometimes we find dealing with people difficult, and in various circumstances. And so Jesus dealt with all kinds of people from all kinds of circumstances, and there never seemed to be any question but what Jesus loved people. Over and over again, the Bible says he had compassion on people. Matthew chapter 9, 36, Jesus had compassion. in this particular case, Jesus had compassion, and so that's something that was inherent in Jesus. That if we do not possess it naturally, it's something that we need to develop. That we need to develop a genuine interest and compassion for people. Then we have there's some scriptures here. Just in the paragraph just above where it says people do have needs, some of the scriptures, while we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, and especially those who are of the household of faith. That's Galatians 6 and verse 10. To me, I think an equally important verse is the verse that is before it, which is, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for we shall reap in due season if we do not faint. Let us not grow weary in well-doing. Now, I'm just going to make mention of this. Sometimes, I'm just going to speak about me. Sometimes I have to do what is right even when my heart is not in it. In dealing with people in various situations, I made a joke at the breakfast table not too long ago, where I don't know, people thought I had really gone above and beyond to do something for somebody. I don't even remember what the situation was, but they're like, it's really good that you did that. And I said, yeah. I said, maybe so. I said, but I'm probably not going to get any reward because I didn't want to do it. In other words, I did what I needed to do, but I just tell you, man, my heart was not in it. My heart was not in it. And that's a... Why are you looking at me like that, Kathy? But have any of y'all, I mean, I'm sure, have you been in that position where you did what you knew was right, but your heart was absolutely not in it?
Your heart was took over.
You can have a sense of obligation and do, but at the same time, I felt bad that my heart wasn't in it. It's like, Todd, you should want to do good. I mean, you can do good, but you should want to do good. I had a situation just this last week, exact same situation, and where I had to help somebody, and I was talking with a friend of mine about it, and a friend of mine in Texas, and it's somebody that we both know and whatnot. And I said I did it, and I said, and I'm mad. I said, and I don't know if I'm mad because I did it, or if I'm mad because I really didn't have a reason to be mad.
Why did you do it?
Because I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought it was the right thing to do, but I deliberated over whether or not I was going to do it, because I thought I had justification. I did have justification not to do it, because sometimes you can help people by not actually, and you're not really helping people. It's like, if you're walking down, well, Ron and I, if we're walking down the streets of Las Vegas and and you can just see them lined up on the sidewalk. I mean, you can give that guy $20, but are you really helping him? You're not helping him. So it was kind of one of those situations where I could have not done something and justified it, but I tried to err on the side of, I just soon help them and be in the wrong as not help them and be in the wrong. You see, you understand what I mean by that? If I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of, I don't want to deny somebody something that they genuinely need, whether or not I think they deserve it. And so, we run into a lot. I say we again, I'm talking about myself, and maybe me more than others, because I probably take the vast majority of all the benevolence calls and everything else that come through this institution, this church. And so, but you never see that in the life of Jesus. really. Although Jesus did know people's motives, and that's what we'll get to in John's account here in just a minute, because I think the lesson kind of missed it just a little bit, but let us not grow weary in well-doing is also a very important part of, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those of the household of faith. Pure religion and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and keep himself unspotted from the world. James chapter 1 and verse number 27. Whosoever has this world's goods and sees that his brother has need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? 1 John 3:17. But the next verse is also very important. Let us therefore love not in word, but in deed and in truth. In other words, don't just say you love somebody. Don't just profess to love somebody. Show that you love that person. And that verse is couched to the one who knows, if you have it and you know that somebody needs it, and by the way, speaking particularly, it's talking about brethren. It's talking about brethren, and you'll see that on page 2 here in just a moment. Out of this same context in the epistle of 1 John. And so we should want to do good, not loving in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. And of course, James 2:20 through the end, 18 through the end of the chapter. You see somebody that's destitute, and has a need of the basic necessities of life, and you say, "Go in peace and be warmed and filled." I hope the best for you, but you don't give them what they need. The Bible says, what good is that? What good is that just to wish somebody the best, but we don't give them the things that they need. And so the Bible's filled with these types of texts. Now, next paragraph. There are some people, and I don't like the way this is phrased, because I don't think it's phrased right, and you already know why I think that. It says there are some people who should not be helped. All right? There's a sense in which I don't think that's right. If somebody needs help, they should be helped. But sometimes, like I told you, if you give something to somebody, you're not really helping them. All right? And as a general rule, we think about it in terms of finances. Giving somebody something. I'll never forget, years ago, Charles Barkley told this. He and Michael Jordan were on Oprah one day. And Barkley told this story about walking down a sidewalk with Jordan. They were walking down, and there was a homeless man sitting on the sidewalk. And Barkley reached in his pocket, and I think he said he's fixing to hand him a $100 bill. And Jordan slapped his hand. And Charles looked at him and he said, "Don't give him anything." Says if he can say, if he can say, "Do you have some spare change?" He can also say, "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order, please?" And his point was that there are a lot of people who don't do anything but beg when they have the ability to do something else. But they're also, look, you don't have to explain it to me. I know, because I thought this.
I mean, that's the thing. There's so many people with mental illness.
That's right. There are.
They can't work at
You're right.
But how do we know? We can't judge who's who.
You're right, but you can't go down and make it rain. Make it rain in the homeless part of town.
I have an example. Years ago, right when I got married, we went to D.C. My sister lived in Louisville, Virginia. Anyway, we went to D.C. and during it was bad cold. It was during Christmas, but it was really cold weather down here. So we go into D.C. and we're walking and going to the museums and whatnot, walking. There are homeless people in boxes. Got little huts and tents and what on the corners, right? Boy comes out, starts walking with me, begging, keeping an eye on his little shed the whole time, right? And he was telling me his sad story about, I can't find work, I this, I that, where are you from? He was real nice, he was nice, polite. I told him we were from Alabama. And I told him, I said, if you can make it to Alabama, look me up, I will find you a job. I can get anybody a job. You may not like it, but I can find you something to do.
Right.
So we're walking the court, we're going around the block, we come by, a gold Lexus pulls up. That same boy gets out and swaps places with another guy. They are moving from corner to corner in their little hut. That is all they have in the world, along with all the rest of the little huts. That is all theirs. And the rest of it's all they have. There's a grid. Every bit of that.
It happens. Happened to me in Ghana. I started to give a little kid some money one time, and Edward Yaboa Aqua says, "Don't give him anything." I said, "Edward, what are you talking about?" He said, "He's a Mali." A Mali is somebody from the country of Mali, which is on the north side of Ghana. What happens is the same thing. The Malis came down from Mali into Ghana, and the parents would sit in their houses all day and send their kids out into the street to beg. That's what he said. He says, he is a Mali. And I'm like, so? So then, then he explained it to me. There has to be some type of discretion and discernment when we help people. Of course, 2 Thessalonians 3 in verse 10 says, if a man will not work, neither let him eat. And if you examine the landscape of our country now, there's the social safety net has robbed people of the incentive to work. The social safety net hasn't. Listen, man, and it doesn't matter where I go. It doesn't matter where I go. I hear the same thing over and over again. Nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to work. Mom was telling me one time about a warehouse that had opened in Osceola, Arkansas, and this is like either right before or right after the pandemic. Just warehouse work. I think starting pay was about $80,000 a year, paid vacation, insurance, and they couldn't find enough people to run it. So there's we have an ethics problem of kind of our own making. We're reaping. We've sown to the wind and we've reaped the whirlwind. And so we have to be discerning in our benevolence. I've argued for years and years, and I think we've done a reasonably good job of this. Is to be intentional. Be intentional in our benevolence. For years and years, churches just kept food pantries and clothing closets and whatnot, and anybody could just come and get whatever they want. We really, in a lot of cases, we really weren't helping those people. Because when I first came here, the back side of my old office was the food pantry, and I'd get the same customers every single month.
Hey Todd, back a few Christmases ago, me and another guy, we got to go to start for some kids. Sometimes it's hard to help the kids without helping the parents.
You're right.
But anyway, so me and him got together, and we went to the gas. We bought pull behind trailer, just about 4 bicycles, and we took and delivered with them kids.
Yeah.
Would you believe some of the parents that we gave them bicycles to
Sold them?
bicycles? Yeah, that happened.
Listen, Bibles for preachers at the preachers seminar in Ghana one year, and before the week was up, we saw some for sale on the sidewalk. They'd already sold them to somebody that had was selling them on the sidewalk. And, I don't know. I bet you I've been making up copies of this. I need to get these out here to you.
Or just leave us people pull up to the food bank line and tell
Hey, we used to get people in here for benevolence cases that was all driving nicer vehicles than I was driving. Hey, Vince, will you guys divvy these out, Matt? And I'm gonna have to make some more copies. This is lessons 47 through 49. All right, we'll pick back up, Lord willing, next Sunday at the bottom of page 15 on lesson, which was page 1 on lesson plan 46. I didn't mean to get that far off this morning, but